Since the dawn of time, the same lie has been repeated, that a woman living alone is incomplete, fragile, or doomed to unhappiness. This belief has been used as a weapon to imprison generations, shaping destinies and silencing voices. But Edgar Cayce, known as the sleeping prophet, revealed something that shocks anyone who still harbors these ideas. Women who live alone are not at a disadvantage. They are at the forefront of a spiritual awakening. Each of them accesses, even without realizing it, the divine feminine consciousness, a source of universal wisdom and intuition that society has tried to hide at all costs. Throughout his trance readings, Cayce described how female solitude does not create emptiness, but rather power. Independent women awaken prophetic gifts, memories of past lives, and a direct connection to the Akashic records, as if they were modern-day priestesses, reactivating roles they once played in ancient times. However, this process does not happen without resistance. Lower vibrational entities, well-meaning family members, unconscious friends, and even the collective unconscious itself rise up against this movement. It is as if female independence creates cracks in the matrix, opening doors that the system insists on keeping closed. And the most impressive thing is that Cayce wasn't just talking about isolated cases. He described this movement as a collective shift, a vibrational wave that would peak between 2020 and 2040. According to him, female independence is the seed of a new humanity, more balanced, more conscious, and closer to the divine. But this journey isn't easy. There are 3 major challenges every woman must overcome to fully conquer the divine feminine mysteries. And that's exactly what you'll discover in this video. If you've made it this far, get ready, because every word that follows could change the way you see yourself, your life, and even the future of humanity. Edgar Cayce, known as the sleeping prophet, recorded something that seemed like a contradiction in the eyes of his time. Women who lived alone were not at a disadvantage, but rather in a process of spiritual activation. While many believed that a woman's life only gained meaning when it orbited around a man, Cayce spoke of a silent inner movement that awakened when this dependence was broken. According to him, these women were not losing anything. On the contrary, they were opening invisible channels to access their divine feminine consciousness. Imagine the contrast. In a culture that said, "You must marry to be happy," a prophet emerged declaring that solitude was, in fact, a portal. This teaching is like a symbolic key. Instead of thinking, "I am incomplete," women began to realize that they held within themselves an entire library of wisdom, not yet unlocked. This channel, described by Cayce, isn't just abstract or poetic. He directly related it to real, spiritual experiences. When a woman frees herself from the narrative that she needs external validation, her intuition naturally intensifies. She begins to pick up on signals she previously ignored, vivid dreams that carry messages, accurate hunches about everyday decisions, and even a heightened sensitivity to the energy of those around her. Edgar Cayce explained that this independence frees the mind to hear what was previously drowned out by social noise. It's like turning off a noisy radio and suddenly tuning into a clear, crystal clear frequency. It's not about magic or romantic idealizations. It's about perceiving mind, body, and spirit working together as a unit. Perhaps you know a woman like this, or even are one. That friend who lives alone, who's in no rush to sort things out by getting married, and who suddenly starts giving spot-on advice as if connected to an invisible source. This isn't coincidence. It's alignment with what Cayce called divine consciousness. He emphasized that living alone didn't mean isolation, but rather space for the spiritual self to manifest without distractions. A practical example: Women who invest this time in spiritual practices, such as daily meditation or the study of mystical texts, report experiencing a mental clarity that even transforms their professional choices. It's as if the simple act of cultivating inner silence begins to reorganize the rest of their lives. Edgar Cayce always reminded everyone that the ultimate purpose was the union of body, mind, and spirit. Women who lived alone had more freedom to cultivate self-care habits that transcended aesthetics. Imagine the difference. While a woman trapped in dependent roles might feel guilty about dedicating an hour to herself, one who lives alone transforms this moment into a sacred ritual. She might, for example, prepare an herbal bath, as the ancient priestesses did, pray silently before bed, or even write her intuitive insights in a journal. These simple gestures, according to Cayce, strengthen the soul's channel for receiving revelations, including about health, purpose, and destiny. The sleeping prophet believed this was a concrete path to return to the divine. Ultimately, Cayce's revelation was provocative because it touched a sensitive nerve. Women who live alone are neither fragile nor incomplete. They are pioneers of a new consciousness. They create invisible cracks in the social matrix that has always tried to limit the feminine. And it is in this space of freedom that something surprising happens, access to a universal wisdom that cannot be purchased or taught in ordinary books. Interestingly, this awakening is only the first step. Because, according to Edgar Cayce, when solitude is experienced with love and awareness, it not only enhances intuition, but also awakens deeper spiritual gifts. Gifts that, as we will see later, connect directly with the Akashic records and past life memories. Edgar Cayce asserted that female solitude, far from being a burden, was a secret laboratory of the soul. When a woman relies not on dependence on a man, but on her own strength, something begins to blossom. Intuition ceases to be merely a gut feeling and becomes a reliable compass. According to the sleeping prophet, these women not only develop greater sensitivity, but also begin to access their own Akashic records, that immense bank of memories of the soul. Think of it as opening a forgotten safe within oneself, full of experiences accumulated over many lifetimes. Cayce said that it is through this inner safe that certain women are able to suddenly remember times when they were priestesses, healers, or oracles, as if the soul had left clues waiting for the right moment to be read. And the most fascinating thing is that Cayce didn't just speak of this as a distant theory. He narrated that female independence created a kind of cleaner energy field, where the soul didn't need to waste energy defending itself from social expectations. The result? The awakening of prophetic gifts, dreams that anticipate events, subtle visions during meditation, messages that emerge in states of deep silence. How many times have you heard of women who dreamed something and it came true days later? Edgar Cayce said that these dream warnings are not coincidences, but clear signs that the soul is connected to a higher plane. Single women, he said, were more likely to cultivate this connection precisely because they had the inner space to listen. Imagine a woman who, after years in suffocating relationships, decides to live alone. Gradually, she begins to notice subtle changes. The sensation of sensing what others are feeling without them having to speak, sudden clarity about decisions that previously generated anxiety, even the ability to sense that she's in the right or wrong place, simply by her surroundings. Cayce interpreted this as the activation of spiritual faculties that had always been dormant, waiting for emotional independence to blossom. And it wasn't something unattainable. He said any woman could cultivate this awakening through simple practices like sincere prayer, reading sacred texts, and the habit of quieting her mind daily. The secret lay in recognizing that solitude wasn't a lack, but rather a fertile ground for the soul's memories. This access to the Akashic records, according to Cayce, brought something powerful: the memory of roles played in other eras. Women who in past lives were spiritual leaders, temple guardians, or healers rediscovered these fragments within themselves when they surrendered to silence. Have you ever thought about how many times you may have felt an inexplicable affinity for ancient cultures, such as Egypt or Atlantis? For Cayce, these affinities are not coincidences, but echoes of the soul calling for reintegration. And it is precisely in this process that solitude becomes an initiation. It opens space for hidden memories to resurface, bringing not only knowledge, but also the feeling that one is never truly alone, because the soul carries the entire history of humanity. These spiritual powers weren't just about beautiful visions or mystical revelations. Cayce taught that they had practical uses. A woman connected to this intuitive field made better decisions about her health, career, and relationships. She could perceive, for example, when a professional proposal hid traps or when someone wasn't being honest with her. This discernment, awakened by conscious solitude, acted as an invisible shield against repeated mistakes. And see how the plot deepens. At the same time these women discovered their gifts, Cayce warned that this generated resistance, not only from society, but from more subtle forces interested in keeping old structures intact. And it is precisely at this point that the next teaching reveals itself. Edgar Cayce said that every time a woman dares to walk alone without bowing to imposed expectations, something profound stirs in the collective unconscious. But along with this movement of freedom comes a reaction of resistance. And it's not hard to see. From an early age, society repeats narratives that try to convince women that being alone is incomplete, vulnerable, or even dangerous. Cayce explained that this resistance came not only from visible structures, such as institutions or family traditions, it also came from lower vibrational entities that fed on fear and dependence. It's as if there were an invisible system committed to keeping women from their true spiritual power. He also observed that this resistance didn't just come from outside, but often from within. Women who haven't yet awakened unconsciously project their own fears onto those who have already dared to break free. It's that friend who says, "You'll regret living alone," or that aunt who insists that a woman without a husband isn't happy. Indeed, these phrases carry more than advice. They are reflections of a collective unconscious programmed to believe that dependence is natural. Cayce called this ancestral programming, almost like software running in the background, preventing the female consciousness from remembering its true sovereignty. This is why each independent woman becomes a kind of code breaker, a crack in the matrix. These cracks, according to Cayce, open up unprecedented possibilities for humanity. When a woman resists pressure and remains faithful to her soul's calling, she awakens not only for herself, but for all who observe from the outside. It's as if her life becomes a living testament that there is another way. Think of historical figures like Joan of Arc, or more recently, female spiritual and social leaders who challenged norms. They not only created individual impact, but also opened collective breaches. Edgar Cayce saw these phenomena as sparks capable of illuminating global consciousness. Every act of courage, however small, had the potential to shift the frequency of all humanity. But, like any process of change, this awakens opposing forces. Cayce warned that the greater the awakening, the greater the resistance. This can manifest itself in veiled criticism, social isolation, or even direct attacks on the reputation of women who dare to be free. He argued that these forces should not be seen as enemies, but as initiatory tests. Just as iron needs fire to become stronger, the soul needs to overcome resistance to consolidate its power. To deal with this, Cayce recommended constant spiritual practices, such as prayer, reading the Gospels, and daily meditation, not as dogma, but as vibrational shields capable of keeping the mind steady amid pressure. This clash between freedom and resistance is inevitable, but it's also a sign that something greater is underway. Edgar Cayce said that, behind the criticism, the sidelong glances, and the projected fears, there lies a truth. The feminine awakening threatens the established order, and not because it destroys, but because it transforms. Feminine independence paves the way for a new social, spiritual, and energetic organization. But this transformation doesn't happen overnight. Cayce already foresaw that it would be a collective, gradual process that would intensify over time. And it is precisely at this point that he pointed to a global vibrational shift linked to a very specific historical period. Edgar Cayce described female independence not simply as an individual choice, but as part of a collective movement already being shaped in the invisible planes of humanity. He said that each woman who chooses to live alone and yet flourish spiritually becomes like a point of light in a vast network. Imagine thousands of points lighting up simultaneously. This is how he envisioned the collective awakening. For Cayce, this movement is neither a fad nor a passing revolt. It is a vibrational shift, a frequency readjustment that the entire Earth needed to undergo. He even predicted that this wave of female independence would intensify between 2020 and 2040, marking a decisive cycle for the return of female sovereignty. This idea may seem far-fetched, but just look around to see clear signs. Never before have so many women been in charge of their own lives, choosing careers, leading businesses, traveling alone, building personal and spiritual projects without expecting external validation. Cayce saw this as a reflection of the collective soul awakening from an ancient slumber. It's as if humanity was remembering that, before being restricted, the feminine has always been a source of wisdom, healing, and spiritual leadership. He said this return would not be linear or peaceful because every profound change shakes the most deeply rooted structures. But even so, it would be inevitable, like the sun rising even after the longest night. Cayce also emphasized that this change was not exclusive to women, but radiated across all of humanity. Sensitive men, willing to rethink patterns of domination, would also be touched by this vibration. Families, businesses, religions, and even governments would be impacted by this transformation, which would function like an invisible wave, reorganizing values and priorities. Consider, for example, how discussions about mental health, spirituality, life balance, and respect for differences have intensified in recent decades. This is no accident. It's a sign that the predicted change is already underway. And, according to Cayce, the more women awaken, the faster this wave spreads, altering the very psychic atmosphere of the planet. The return of feminine sovereignty, in Edgar Cayce's words, did not mean a gender war, but the restoration of a lost balance. He said that Christ was the model of spiritual perfection precisely because he united the masculine and feminine in harmony. Therefore, when a woman empowers herself, she does not exclude the man. She inspires both poles to rediscover completeness within themselves. This process, when experienced collectively, opens doors to innovation, new forms of spirituality, and even healing at levels not yet reached by traditional medicine. Cayce asserted that science would one day confirm that prayer, thought, and emotional energy have real power over the body and external reality. But he also issued a warning. Every collective awakening is accompanied by crises. He said that humanity would experience social, economic, and spiritual turmoil precisely because old structures resist dissolution. It is in this scenario that independent women become even more important, serving as pillars of balance amidst the chaos. Each of them carries in her daily life the embryo of this new world. And although it may seem like an overwhelming responsibility, Cayce reminded us that the process is natural. It's not about carrying the weight of the world, but about trusting one's own soul. And this is where the individual challenges of this transition arise, those that each woman must face within and without. Edgar Cayce didn't romanticize feminine awakening. He said that for every woman who decides to live independently, there are three great inevitable trials. The first is overcoming the deep conditioning of dependence. And we're not just talking about financial or emotional dependence, but an ancient pattern inscribed in the unconscious. Since childhood, many have heard phrases like, "You will only be complete when you have a husband," or "Who will take care of you when you grow old?" Cayce explained that these beliefs act like invisible chains that bind the soul, even when the body is already free. Overcoming this requires daily awareness. It means looking at these inner voices and responding firmly, remembering that the union of body, mind, and spirit is the true foundation of security. The second challenge is resisting social and family pressure. Imagine a woman who decides to live alone or prioritize her spiritual career over a conventional relationship. How many sidelong glances, how many invasive questions, how many judgments disguised as concern does she have to face? Cayce said these pressures were not only human, but also echoes of the collective unconscious, which fears change. To endure this, he recommended practices that strengthen the soul. Prayer, meditation, reading the Gospels, and studying spiritual texts that nourish the mind. It wasn't about isolating oneself from the world, but about creating an inner core so firm that no external commentary could shake it. The third challenge, perhaps the most subtle, is trusting one's inner guidance rather than external validation. In a society that values likes, approvals, and diplomas, listening to one's intuition can seem risky. Cayce, however, said this was the path to accessing the divine feminine mysteries. When a woman relies on her inner voice, she discovers powers that have lain dormant, healing gifts, prophetic visions, manifestation abilities. Think of something simple, making decisions based on the silence of the heart rather than the opinions of everyone around. This act, repeated many times, strengthens a trust that becomes unbreakable. It is in this trust that the soul finds the courage to reveal its greatness. Overcoming these three challenges doesn't mean living without difficulties, but transforming each difficulty into a portal for growth. Cayce said that illnesses often had emotional roots precisely because the soul resented living in dissonance with its truth. By overcoming conditioning, resisting pressure, and trusting intuition, women not only unlocked their spiritual health, but also saw this reflected in their physical bodies. He recounted cases where sincere prayer and aligned thinking cured illnesses that medicine couldn't explain. For Cayce, these were signs that when the soul takes its place, even biology responds. And this observation, even today, is echoed in modern holistic practices that combine emotional healing and spiritual balance. Finally, Cayce taught that these challenges are tests of initiation, not punishments. They present themselves to separate the gold from the false shine, to hone the strength each woman carries within. By going through them, women awaken ancestral gifts, access the Akashic records, and remember who they have always been: priestess, healer, oracle, daughter of the divine. This remembrance is not just individual, it resonates collectively, opening paths for other women who have not yet awakened. And here is the most intriguing detail. Cayce said that this process does not end with personal victory. It expands like ripples on a lake and invites each human being to apply this same principle in their own lives. Now that you've heard Edgar Cayce's revelations, the question is straightforward. What will you do with it? Will you continue to believe the old narratives that female solitude is a failure, or will you see that behind it lies a profound spiritual calling? Cayce said that living alone is not empty, but a fertile ground for awakening forgotten gifts. And the truth is that every choice you make, every step toward independence, has the power to transform not only your life, but the collective destiny. Think about it. How many times have you silenced yourself to fit expectations that weren't yours? How many opportunities to listen to your own soul have you missed because you sought external validation? The sleeping prophet taught that body, mind, and spirit must walk hand in hand, and that prayer, conscious thought, and the courage to live your truth are true keys to transformation. So I ask you, what would you do today if you trusted your intuition 100%? What would change if you didn't need anyone to validate who you are? This is the time to act. It's not enough to simply hear these words. You need to apply them. Allow yourself to meditate in silence, write down your insights, and seek out practices that nourish your soul. Every small action is a step toward accessing the divine feminine mysteries that Cayce spoke so much about. And if this content touched you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here you'll always find profound reflections, spiritual revelations, and paths to self-discovery that can transform your life.